We finally got to see some Toronto Maple Leafs on the ice here at training camp. We take a look at some of the line combinations and what it means potentially going into some preseason action, which does kick off this weekend. And of course, some more talk about William Nylander at center. This is the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your daily fix for all things Leafs. I'm your host, David Morassutti from Sportsnet. Joined today with me is Frank Stanisci from Canada Frank Live. And as always, the Locked On Leafs podcast is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast. So make sure you subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts from. And make sure you get us on YouTube, subscribe, and get notifications of every episode that is posted each and every day. And a reminder that today's episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $200 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. Today is technically Fan Friday, and while I don't have a fan per se, although Frank is technically a fan of the show, he is a fan favorite, and that's why I wanted to have him on the show today. Frank, first off, thank you for coming on, and I guess it must be getting close to fall as we're getting right into the hockey season and getting away from the summer.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And yeah, fall's coming. The Blue Jay season is coming to a close. The transition from summer to fall to winter is on its way, and for those of us that love the game of hockey, which I do, the excitement begins, and I'm waiting to hear what we're going to talk about. I can't wait to contribute.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that we're only a couple of days away from seeing this team play an actual hockey game. We forget that training camps can be for so long, but the time to get things ramped up is not very long, right? Like they just got on the ice on Thursday for the first time. And then, so for some of these players, they have never, this is their first introduction to being with the Leafs, and then they're going to be thrown right into the action. So to get you guys all set up for, I kind of wanted to go through just a bit of a breakdown of what we saw on the first day of camp, and likely for what I am seeing on the second day of camp here, they're going to be having a scrimmage to get themselves ready for their upcoming game. So just to give you an idea of where the lines were breaking down on the first day of training camp here. And I don't think there was too many surprises per se of where players were in training camp. So this is here from David Alter. Obviously, if you're following David, he's giving you all the up-to-date stuff here at training camp. He's really good at it. So the way that they broke this up is there's two main groups here at camp. The first group here had, a lot of your normal guys. You had Bertucci with Matthews and Marner. No surprise there. Matthew and I skating with Tavares and Lafferty. You had the third line of Hirvonen, Gambrell, and Steves. Kyle Clifford, Fraser Minton, and then you had a kind of a Joseph Blandisi, Max Ellis. Fourth line. And then the blue line. Again, not many surprise here. Jake McCabe and John Klingberg, Mark Giordano and Timothy Liljegren. You had Lajoie and Villeneuve, Rafai and Miller, and then Samsonov, Petruzzelli, Hildeby were the goaltenders there. So then you had the group two. We'll get into the groups together. I just wanted to put these out first, and then we can go back to talking about them. Then you had the group two. We want to see who Nylander was going to be the line mates with. It turns out it's going to be Max Domi and Kalle Järnkrok to start things off. You had Nick Robinson, Pontus Holmberg, and Nick Abruzzese as the second line. You had Noah Gregor, the guy who is on the PTO, David Kampf, and Ryan Reeves as the de facto fourth line. In this case, or the third line, you have Slavin, Cowan, Easton Cowan, Shaw, Tverberg as the fourth line. Then you have your one NHL pairing of Riley Brody, and then the rest Marley's guys, Kokkonen, Niemela, Legis, and Timmins. Although technically Timmins is on the NHL roster, but not viewed as everyday NHL. And you had Chadwick and Dillingham, and then you have Joseph Woll and Martin Jones, the two guys kind of competing for the backup, but in a way maybe not competing, considering Martin Jones is only here for the year, and nobody even thought he was going to be here when that signing was made. So, I would say there's not a lot of surprises when you see the groups here at training camp, right? Like, I think I just want to see what potential changes are going to be. And I think the biggest change is now we're going to see Sam Lafferty in a top 6 role, and not just in a top 6 role. I kind of think he is going to be the new Alexander Kerfoot. He's going to be the guy that's going to move up and down the lineup. I'm assuming he's going to be playing a lot of penalty kill, and maybe not so much of a surprise that Matthew Nyes is with John Tavares rather than him. I think that seems like the adequate spot for the upcoming top prospect / rookie for the Leafs.
Yeah, Lafferty's somebody that you'll see a lot of, especially because not that this team is lead-footed, but it's not as fast as the teams that the Leafs have provided their fans in past years. In fact, I guess we can jump right to the fact that there's the word snot was used by the GM, and for those of you that are too young to know what the snot means, it's like it used to be said, he's kicking the snot out of the other guy. So there's obviously going to be a little more sandpaper on this team as opposed to speed. Lafferty has a bit of sandpaper and also speed, so I think he's the definition of the transition that the Maple Leafs are making this season that the fans will notice, and it'll be very interesting. And as far as the lineups are concerned, I agree with you. There's no real surprises. The surprises will come at the end of the preseason when we find out who the guys are that aren't in the starting lineup.
Yeah, and you talk about the lack of speed that they're trying to address. I think, bringing Noah Gregor on the PTO, I think that's why they brought him in. Brad Chilving said this guy's got a lot of great speed and kind of has, that tenacity that they're looking for. They're not just looking for guys with speed. Like, speed doesn't mean much if you don't bring something else to the table. You either have to be a good offensive player or you got to bring some tenacity to the lineup. I think Max Domi helps a little bit with that. He's not the slowest guy. We know that Nylander is the driver of that line, especially as the center. And talking with Sheldon Keefe yesterday, the media kind of asked about, the Nylander, Domi, Yarncroke combination. He says, well, the good thing here is all three of those guys have played centers in their career. So if you're going to put Nylander at center, it makes sense to put other guys who have some experience in that position. They can kind of all pitch in, right? When it comes to the defensive side of things, Domi, they expect him to take some draws because he is a good face-off person. So I think you're going to see the team kind of work with Nylander at center, but not always strictly having to play that position. I think they're going to make some adjustments to highlight his strengths, but also try to maybe cover up some of his deficiencies. And a lot of people, whenever you talk about William Nylander center, the always talked about issue is defense. Can he do the things on the defensive side of the puck to make him a responsible center?
Also, in his contract here, they're going to put him at center. I think that's a bit of a opening, and the Leafs letting him know that, listen, we're going to try and pay you as much as we think we can. And part of the level of payment is determined by the position you play. Centers, as a rule, make more money than wingers. And as a winger, his ability to ask for more money is a little bit, it's managed a little bit. Whereas at center, the ceilings is a lot higher. We've heard that conversation so many times when Matthews and Marner are discussed. The reason why Matthews deserves more money and is a more important player is because he plays center. Even though we all know that there's a large debate about which guy helps this team win more. I think this is an important political statement by the Maple Leafs saying, hey, William, listen, we're going to put you at center. Let's see what you can do.
Yeah, so we're going to discuss a little bit more about that because I think you brought up some great points there about kind of Nylander's what this whole move to center means and his contract stuff, because I think, and he did talk about it, so I do want to talk about this on the other side here. But before we do, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors, and that is our good friends over at Birddogs. Birddogs makes you look good because they bring the stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit similar through the thigh and the leg, by giving you also a truly sculpted look. The shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon's, but fit way better. And they're also made of the non-stiff restricting cotton that you usually see in other shorts. They actually have a cloud knit fabric that makes it look just like khakis, but stretches for a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And use an anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. They're great for many different functions and occasions. I'm usually someone that uses them for golf, the pool, once in a while if I need to throw something on for when I'm going for a workout. They're easy to just throw on and get you on your day. They're that versatile, and they come with some great products. If you do place an order, I got the tumbler when I got my order of Birddogs, so it's a great little incentive to add to that. So make sure you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter the promo code LockedOnNHL at checkout for free Birddogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti here, and joining with me is Frank, my good friend Frank Stanisci. He is filling in for Mike, who is away. Should be back next week. And we just had the conversation about Nylander playing center and what that could mean for his contract, and he did have the contract talk. Nylander knew he was going to be talking about his contract yesterday, and he wanted to make it clear two things once again: that he wants to be in Toronto. This is where he wants to play. He's going to let his agent Louis Gross and Brad Treliving talk about the details and get those details sorted out. And Brad Treliving did say that he's going to try to work with Louis Gross to get it done, but he doesn't seem like to be in a rush. I think with Nylander, it doesn't. We hadn't heard any interest of him going to another team or any other teams trying to push to get him. Obviously, that won't happen until we get later in the year and the contract's not done and what's going to happen there. But here's the thing: with him playing center, and let's say this conversion to center actually works, does this potentially line him up, as you said, for more money, as you said, with making the Austin Matthews comparison? But maybe this whole it kind of fixes a thing that happens down the road with John Tavares' contract being up in a couple of years. Does that seem like a natural transition to William Nylander takes the John Tavares role? And John Tavares, we know that his next contract is not going to be $11 million, and he will play the wing. He is open to playing the wing. Do you see that as a potential swap scenario or transition where Nylander, you can justify paying him more because he's a center versus paying him as a winger?
Absolutely, you locked on to the facts here. It is clear. It is clear that William Nylander considers himself a center. He's considered himself a center from the time that he arrived in Toronto, and when they put him on the wing, we heard that he felt he was a center, and I think he could be a good center. I mean, his defensive problems aren't that he can't play defense. Unfortunately, the albatross around his neck is the fact that a lot of people believe that he is probably one of the best players in the league when he wants to be. When he doesn't want to be, that's when, people's faith in him defensively starts to be questioned, because sometimes he doesn't have the jump in his stride that he does when he wants to play. But here's the thing. This guy can play that way. If we remember a couple of years ago when he went to the World Championships, I remember watching him knock people down, and I'm going, where's that guy during the Leafs season? Let's see if he can do that in an environment where we're seeing the standard hockey statement where you play with guys that are really tough, you grow a couple of inches. And I don't think I have to explain what that means. Now, he's going to be on a team that has a lot more grit than it's had in the past. Let's see what that does to the way he plays, because I think that he's a guy who can be physical, not getting fights. And I'm not talking about fights here. I'm talking about use physicality in a way that isn't intimidating, but sends a message. And when he does that, he's going to have guys behind him who are going to say, you got a problem with that? That's what this Leaf team, I think, is going to look like. They're going to look more aggressive, and I think it's an opportunity for him to be more aggressive and help, remove the shackles of some people's predisposed opinions about the kid.
Yeah, I think when you see the thing that obviously people need to realize here, when I make that statement about Nylander moving to center, potentially placing John Tavares down the road, right now he's penciled in as a third line center. Right. So the only way that really changes is if they decide to move Nylander to the second line and put him at center and move Tavares to the wing. That's really the only way that actually does come to fruition, and the only way that Nylander can actually make that argument in contract talks. He can't say, well, I'm a second line center, pay me like a second line center. Well, the Leafs can be like, well, you didn't play second line center, so we can't pay you like a second line center, right? So it's going to be a real challenge there, I think, for the Leafs to get that kind of all sorted out. But the good thing is, it looks like the Leafs have time to figure this out. There's no deadline for Nylander to want to get this contract done. It's not like, the first time they tried to do a contract and there was a clock on it and they took it down to the 11th hour to get that contract done. Nylander said he wants to stay here. Well, Brad Treliving then can take his time to figure out the best deal. And I think right now, considering training camps already started, you might as well see how Nylander's transition to center works and how he starts the season before you make a commitment. I mean, this reminds me a lot about what happened with David Pastrnak with the Bruins. He did not sign his contract until I think it was like January of his contract year. And like the Bruins, there was a little more concern on that one because, Pastrnak didn't feel like the Bruins were making it a priority and wasn't giving him the value he wanted. But then eventually, cooler heads prevailed and they got the deal done. Oh, it was March. Actually, it was even later than that. March 2nd. I think it was like roughly around the trade deadline is when they got that contract done. So in this case, I think Nylander will be willing to wait. And at this point, if he's confident that he can really play center, or if he can play better than what he has in the past, then guess what? He'll line himself up for that $10 million contract that he's been talking about. Whether or not the Leafs should be paying him $10 million and whether they can afford it, that's a Brad Treliving that's a Brad Treliving problem, right? That's something that Brad Treliving is going to have to figure out because, it's a tough balance. They've had so many issues trying to get this balance with their cap structure. Brandon Pridham, that's the name I was thinking about before. Brandon Pridham was the one that's had to juggle a lot of different things here, and the problem here becomes you have other guys you want to bring back potentially. Let's say Tyler Bertucci does so well, and the Leafs want to retain him. Well, that number doesn't start at 5.5 for Tyler Bertuzzi. It could be higher than that. And how much higher can the Leafs afford? If you look at the blue line, the only defensemen signed past this season are Morgan Rielly, Jake McCabe, and Connor Timmins. Two of those guys are regular NHLers. One of them might try to play himself into an everyday NHLer, but likely is just a guy that comes off the bench. So, there's got to be we've been talking about this balancing act. There's another season. Now, the good thing is it's one last season for Tavares and Marner's contracts. And obviously we know Marner's contract's the next one that they got to figure out. But Tavares, that money you could save on the Tavares contract, you could technically put towards other things. I just say to give that money from Tavares to Nylander, while it would make sense, I don't think it would make the most economical sense for this Leafs team that's just been way too top-loaded for way too long.
Yeah, and as far as Nylander's contract's concerned, he's going to be willing to talk about it. One of the biggest anvils that can hurt a general manager is when the player says, "I don't want to talk about it during the season, so let's get it settled now before the season starts." We haven't heard that yet. That doesn't mean it isn't going to happen. So with Nylander's contract, they have time to talk about it, like you said, as it stands right now, in the exhibition season. We'll see if that still the conversations are still happening. Brad Treliving is in a situation where it's his first year as general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. There are a lot of things that he has to accept, and accepting those things means there's a lot of things that he would have preferred to do if he was here last year or the year before. He would have started on that stuff. So he's in a transition season for himself, and he's got a very interesting group of players. The way they did it, you talk about contracts, all these 1-year contracts that he has. He has a defenseman that's on a 1-year contract in Klingberg that's a pretty good defenseman. They're going to find out how good he is here in Toronto. And you talked about Tyler Bertucci. So this team next year may look a lot different than it does this year. And not to be the first person to say it's time for John Tavares to retire, but Father Time has never lost a battle. Father Time eventually wins. So the question is, Tavares is a proud guy, and I think he'll be honest with himself, and know and believe that his contract value and his ability to contribute to the team. I don't think he was a $10 million player last year, but if he becomes a $5 million player getting paid $10 million, that's something that his pride's going to ask him, where he fits in that. But this is not a guy who pouts and whines about his circumstance. This guy works really hard, and last year he did some work on his skating. We all know that that's one of the problems that he has. So yeah, contract years in the NHL, a lot of times we've talked about this off the air about players who what they do those first 4 years of their 6-year contract, teams don't worry about year 5 and 6. And in this case, more years, but the point.
No, I know, and that's the gamble you take when you do and the Leafs have done these 1-year deals so many times. And in Tyler Bertuzzi's case, he might have such a good year that a team that didn't want to give him that multi-year deal now comes up and says, "Yeah, we'll sign you in multi-years and we'll give you more than what Toronto wants." It's also a matter of, can the Leafs convince guys maybe to not go for that max payday? The Leafs will probably be willing to give a multi-year deal to a Tyler Bertuzzi, but it also has to be at a deal that makes sense for them. And they're going to probably have to make – that's something the Bertuzzi is going to have to figure out. Does he want to make the big payday and get the multi-year deal at a higher level number and probably go somewhere else to get it? Or does he take that multi-year deal, maybe take a little less to stay in Toronto? That's always a tough balancing act. We know that Domi wants to make Toronto his permanent home. He's Elliot Friedman reported as much, as I said before in the past. So we'll see how that all changes. And you've also got some other question marks. When Ilya Samsonov, is he the long-term goaltender of this team? Luckily Joseph Woll is signed for a few years. You got obviously only 1 year for Samsonov before you have to figure that part out. There's a lot of question marks with this team that are going to have to be figured out. But, I would say the biggest one will be on the blue line. And that's something I'm going to be watching for in the first preseason game that's going to be coming up this weekend. On the other side, we're going to kind of just look at what could be happening in this preseason game and what we'd be looking for, and just a general overview of Leafs hockey returning to the ice. This is Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti here, joined by Frank Stanisci, a good friend of mine and a fan favorite here, and I wanted to bring a fan favorite for Fan Friday, so it kind of worked out. I know every time I have you on, Frank, there's a few admirers in the comment section that say, you got to have Frank on more. I
don't like compliments.
And good thing, and people might be a little. I'm on the right side always on the show, and usually when Mike's not here and I have a guest, I'm on the left side. Frank's like, Can you go on the right side?
I'm a real diva. I'm a diva. What can I say?
Don't worry. There's certain other people when they were in their broadcasting careers always preferred to be on a certain side every time when they did a broadcast, and if it was ever switched, it would be awkward for them. So we have our first taste of Leafs preseason action, and it's not your typical preseason game because it's not at a usual time that hockey is played.
Yeah,
2
really.
o'clock on a Sunday. First and foremost, NHL, you're putting a preseason game on a Sunday afternoon when it's football season. Are you nuts? So that's the first faux pas of that one.
Maybe that's why Riley and Marner were at the Bills game.
Yeah, maybe they wanted to get that. Maybe they wanted to get that before.
We're here.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and like I don't know. First thing, we don't really know, and as we're recording this, we don't know which group, because we know the Leafs are in 2 groups for now. We don't know which group is going to be playing in that preseason game. I can show you the 2 groups, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of guess which group potentially. I have an idea of which group is going to be the one playing, but just to give you an idea of which ones you could see. And I know the issue is if you're a fan that wants to either go and watch the game or if you want to go get tickets for the game, do you spend out the money to go to a game? I know it's really tough. I always say take your time. Don't buy the tickets sight unseen. Wait a little bit until you find out who's playing. Always my recommendation for preseason. So we know that there's the 2 groups. This is how the 2 groups were lining up for Friday. I'll make it a little bit bigger because I know it's
good, because I was making mine bigger.
So group 1, same as the day before, right? Klingberg, Marner, like the groups are pretty much the same. The only change is Joseph Woll got moved to group 1 and Ilya Samsonov was moved to group 2. And the only guess I've had of which group potentially could play on Sunday is group 2 was out on the ice first today. Now, I don't know if that was just how they drew it up. Potentially, I don't know, but I always wonder if the first group on the ice is the group that's actually going to see the playing time. Again, that's a guess on my part, but if that's the case, then you'll get your first test of Nylander at center because William Nylander is a part of Group 2. Martin Jones and Samsonov will likely split the duties if they were to play in that game. You got Morgan Riley in Group 2. TJ Brody is in that group as well. It's by first. It's weird how it's done by numerical. So if you're wondering where players are, it's done numerically. So at this rate, we can't really say for sure which group is going to be going up, but I think Group 2 would be the one because they were on the ice first. But again, that's just me providing a guess.
I'll give you another reason: Martin Jones and Samsonov on the same Group 2.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Is you got you know, do they want to give Samsonov that first game? Do they want to get him started off? Get 2 goaltender. And you having 2 goaltenders as well. There is a scrimmage today too, but we already know that Sheldon Keefe will likely provide some idea of what which group is going out. But when you're looking at a preseason game, Frank, and we already know that it's hard to judge certain players during preseason because of some aren't going all out in the preseason while others are because they got to make a name for themselves. How do you weigh a preseason game and what happens?
These are games that aren't intended to be ones that you're concerned about winning or losing. Mm-hmm. These are part of the process, and when players come in, the biggest thing about preseason is you've got players that weren't on the team last year, weren't starters on the team last year, new players who you want to see in the environment of playing, in NHL games. The only reason big names play in preseason is because they're told they have to. The league has a rule how many regulars that played last year play in a preseason game. So this is really a process about establishing the confidence in players. Like a Matthew Nyes, for example, in the playoffs was a regular starter, but he wasn't here at the beginning of the year last year. now he gets a chance to remind people of how good he is. This is an opportunity for him to continue to, impress, Leaf management, obviously, but also the fans, because of the reason you stated earlier. People pay to go watch these games. They've got to be entertaining, and the fans have a level of expectation that has nothing to do with making this a better team. They buy a ticket, they want to see the best players they can, like you said. So that to me is what exhibition season is. It's about bringing in new players who weren't a part of the squad to see if they could be part of the starting group. And the Leafs have some players, some really interesting players that, are going to be part of the starting group that weren't, like a Bertucci and, Klingberg. And these guys, we know that they want them on the team. These aren't guys they brought in to be, wear the blue jerseys in practice or whatever. These are the guys they're counting on. And this is an opportunity for them to play under NHL standards and see how they fit in.
Yeah, and just so you know, the first preseason game is a road game for the Leafs against the Ottawa Senators. So if anybody's looking for tickets, hope you're in the Ottawa area because you're not going to get them in Toronto. The Leafs' first home preseason game is on Monday, September 25th against the Ottawa Senators. So that's usually how these ones go. You got one game against one team, Group 1 and a Group 2. It looks like I'm going to be going to that first home preseason game. I've gotten an invitation, so I will get a chance to take a look at whichever Leafs go on the ice. Personally, now I kind of hope that it's Group 1 that doesn't play, because then I get to see Group 1 play in Ottawa, play in Toronto. So we'll see how that goes. We also know the Ottawa Senators having their owner finally getting announced. He is it's official. He is now taking over the team, and this is an Ottawa team that I'm very curious about this year, because I was having a conversation with Ross Levitan. He's the host of Locked On Senators. He says, we just want to make the playoffs. Just let us have the playoffs. What do you make of the Senators this year, Frank? Just kind of a final thought for the show.
Jeepers. Every year for the last 4 or 5 years, I kept saying, this is a team that can actually make some noise. This is a team that could make the playoffs. This is what I've said the last 4 years. Guess what I'm saying this year? This is a team that could make the playoffs, and we'll see how they go. I mean, they keep coming out with a great start, and then all of a sudden they hit a wall. Inexplicably, they hit a wall, and then they put themselves behind the 8 ball, and then they don't do enough in the middle of the season, so that the end of the season becomes a place where they can actually attack a position in the playoffs. So this is a team that's unpredictable, but they have a lot of youth that's had a chance to be NHLers. They've got leadership in the room. They've got a coach who's been coaching for a little while. And I think they're hungry for a playoff spot. So it isn't going to be a question of whether they want it. It's just going to be a question of, can they do it?
Yeah, we'll see if they'll be able to do that. But a lot more optimism now in Ottawa with the new owner that seems to want to, put the investment in making this team live to its potential. Then we haven't really had that in the last few years for Ottawa. So it's a good thing there for Ottawa, and hopefully also reignites this Battle of Ontario in a more meaningful way, not just in name, but also in competition as well. So we'll be looking forward to that. You can catch those preseason games. I actually didn't see who is broadcasting those ones. Probably Ottawa will be on if you live in Ottawa, probably be on TSN. Sportsnet likely will have that first one there. But they'll have all that information. We'll post it if we can on our Twitter account so you can see it there. So you make sure you go and follow us on Twitter at Locked On Leafs, and follow myself at _Morassutti. On the next show, we will break down that first preseason game and what we saw, what we liked, and what we didn't like. The usual stuff. We're going to knock off a little bit of the rust, too, in that regard, because we haven't broken down a game in quite a while. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.